Hello and welcome back to Inside Update, where every other week we are catching up about headlines across Connecticut. Today's show is brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org and this wonderful team. We are a nonprofit newsroom focused on rooting out corruption in Connecticut through investigative journalism. Today, I am joined by Mark Fitch, Catherine Revelo, and Brandon Whiting, the usual suspects. And before we begin, I have to brag a little bit about this team because last night we were honored to receive 8 awards from the Connecticut Press Club, 7 of them first place. Mark, you were the most decorated person in attendance, which was pretty cool. You got a special shout out for that, and the entire Inside Investigator team did as well, separately for our work and for participating in the contest. It was just a wonderful event hosted by the CT Press Club. You each deserve just fantastic credit for your work. The many more to come, I am absolutely certain. Viewers, listeners out there, if you are a subscriber to our free emails, you've already received a link in your inbox to check out those awards and a picture of some smiling faces holding certificates. But we will also add it in the show notes so you can click in and check out our awards page. Some really amazing and exceptional stories that are worth reading. These are awards from 2023, so they're a little dated, but at the same time, it's evergreen stuff. It turns out there's been a lot of great content put out that is worth your time if you're a newer watcher, listener, or subscriber, or if you just miss those, because life is busy and sometimes that happens. So, of course, though, you are not here to talk about 2023. We are here to get an update on what is going on right now in the state of Connecticut. So I want to jump right in. First, Mark is going to talk about Connecticut's foster family system and an investigation that he did. We're going to talk about a bill that stops license suspensions over unpaid tickets that moved to the House floor after a favorable vote in the Judiciary Committee. And finally, an occupational license reform bill that would save applicants $32 million over 2 years. Catherine's going to have the details on that. Mark, I know this is not an uplifting story that we're starting with after my upbeat start to the show, but let's talk a little bit more about foster families and what the heck is going on. This is a great piece that you did.
Sure. I mean, it's not entirely downbeat. But I was approached by some foster families and some people who wanted to remain either anonymous or in the background because they work for agencies that are funded by DCF, and DCF runs the foster care system in Connecticut. But essentially, these foster families, particularly what we call therapeutic foster care. Therapeutic foster care are parents who take in troubled youth, either psychologically, emotionally, behaviorally, what have you. They're more difficult to work with. They're more difficult to care for. It takes a lot of time and therapeutic intervention. And for that, they get a higher stipend. So they get it used to be upwards of $82 a day to take on the most complex children. Um, but what's happened, and generally it's more like $55 a day. It depends on what range you're in. But that stipend hasn't increased since 2013. And as everybody knows, we've had quite a bit of inflation since then. So, uh, you know, that stipend has not kept up with the times, and it ends up becoming it becomes more difficult for those parents to continue fostering these troubled youth that are coming to them. And a lot of these troubled youth are coming to them because we've shut down a lot of the facilities where we used to, put youth in residential care. That's been a decade-long process of getting youth out of residential care and then trying to move them into foster or reunite them with their families. But there's more to it than just the stipend, because in 2022, the DCF entered into a new contract where they pretty much revamped therapeutic foster care. They eliminated that top $82 stipend, and now $55 is the most that you can get. And the new contract, it essentially, because of the way it was structured, it took what they call wraparound funds away from the therapeutic foster care agencies. So funds is extra money so that if a foster family needs tutoring, wants the kids to go to summer camp, uh, do all sorts of things that like normal kids would do, uh, that extra money, that wraparound funding would cover that. The agencies used to handle it. DCF has now taken over the wraparound funding, and a lot of the parents say that it's like pulling teeth to get coverage for those extra costs. So now they're dealing with not only a stipend that hasn't gone up in a decade, but they're saying they're having much more difficulty getting wraparound funds to cover these extra costs for taking on these kids and trying to do the nice things that they would want to do for them. So there's that. And then under this new model, it's a big push to reunite these kids with their families from whom they've been removed. And it remains to be seen how that goes. Connecticut has, for especially the last 5 to 6 years, really pushed into a more kinship care model in that they're trying to find family members for these foster kids to stay with rather than just strangers essentially who take them in. So they've been trying to find family. They're trying to reunite families. It doesn't always go as planned, obviously, and the new model recognizes that. They estimate that up to 25% of kids will never be able to be returned to their parents. And some of the things that I heard in my conversations with these parents is that the process of trying to rehabilitate the family and the children so they can get together sometimes doesn't really work out. I mean, it's considered like a year-long process, but can you really reform a family that's had an incredible share of difficulties within a year and get them to a place where it's safe to reunite those kids? I mean, that's a question that's it's gonna play out different for everybody. The other thing that has kind of popped up in these conversations is that the level of acuity, the behavioral issues, the emotional issues among the kids that are being put into these therapeutic foster homes has really risen dramatically in the past couple years, while the stipend has remained the same, but it's really risen dramatically. And that's due in part to the closure of group homes. One parent I talked to, they were trying to place a kid from the closed Harwinton Star home that we wrote about. And she was unable to take that child because of the intense behavioral issues. So all this is all coming to me from the parents, from some placement agencies. So I ended up talking to the officials at DCF that kind of run the whole show, including the chief operating officer and the head of foster services and the head of therapeutic foster services. Basically, what they told me is that, hey, there's no way we can compensate these parents enough. All right, fair enough. They did, however, right before our story came out, and they never mentioned it to me in the interview, but they did send out a notice that they were increasing the stipends by 5%. So that's a kind of positive outcome. On the other hand, they did say that with the higher acuity of the children being placed in these foster homes, basically, it is kind of an interesting point to make, but they're like, oh, well, you're finally getting the kids that you were always supposed to get. Like, this is what therapeutic foster care is before. The kids that you had before, they weren't really therapeutic foster kids. They were just kids who needed a home.
Huh.
And it was kind of an interesting statement, I think. One that some of the parents met with kind of shock. Um, but if they were just kids who needed a home and weren't necessarily therapeutic foster kids, why are you paying them the higher stipend? Uh, for one, and two, some of the stories that I've heard that were related to me by these therapeutic foster parents are like, no, we had some pretty tough kids, and now the ones that are coming are even tougher. Um, but yeah, I thought that was kind of an interesting point to make that, before it was just us trying to place children anywhere. Now you're getting the tough cases that you were supposed to get all along. Okay. Um, but this new contract that everybody's operating under, I mean, it did cause some foster care placement agencies to drop off. One of them closed their doors for good because it was a combination of the costs, the requirements, whether or not those agencies were able to meet those demands. But when those agencies go away, you lose recruitment because it's their job to go out and recruit new foster families. And DCF told me they're dying for foster families. They need more. They need more kinship. They need more foster. They need more everything. And one of the things that I heard repeatedly from everybody I talked to is that, foster care is really built on word of mouth. So you want your foster families, you want your foster parents to be happy because they'll tell other people about the joys of foster care, or kind of spread the word. But if they're not happy, you can really see a drop off. And that's not the only problem facing, we've had COVID, we've had record high inflation. We've had a number of different issues in the past 3 to 4 years that have popped up where, and a lot of foster families are on the lower side of the income spectrum. If you can't afford to support yourself, you can't afford to support a foster child either. So both nationally and in the state, we've seen a drop off in the number of foster parents, going into the system. And so we called the story "Perfect Storm" because it is a perfect storm of all these different factors that has led to a drop off in the number of parents willing to take in foster kids, particularly the tougher cases like the therapeutic foster kids. So yeah, you've got what they feel is a lack of support. You have this new contract model that has had a few bumps along the road. You've got higher acuity for the kids coming into the system. You've got inflation and just the cost of living in general. And yeah, it's been tough. And so all of those kind of came together to create a situation where DCF is desperate for foster parents, but they only want specific kinds of foster parents. And, we've changed our system to the point where we have a lot of kids in need of foster families because we don't have the residential facilities that we used to have. So yeah, it's a bit of a perfect storm. Like I said, it wasn't entirely a downer of a story. It was nice to see that this stipend increase went out for those foster families. So I mean, I guess that's kind of at least a positive note.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And I feel like this won't be the last that we hear about this. I mean, just the volume of tips. I mean, I gotta say, I know that, there's no shortage of tips coming in, but we want to hear from people. I mean, I have, off the top of my head, I could think of 4 different folks who have reached out, families saying that they have dropped their foster license, I guess, as a family that was previously taking kids. And some of the reasons are the systemic, large scale post COVID stuff you were talking about. Some of it is very Connecticut specific in the way that they were treated or the information they were given. I think that
And we
if there are
will, and
more
we will
stories
be looking into that. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, and I guess that's my ask. If foster families who have given up on that system, I'm curious why. Because I get the impression that, as you said, there's so many different factors, and I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of what's going on. It's so individualized, like kids are, though, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is trying to figure out how to help these kids get from difficult situations to productive, healthy, fulfilling lives. And man, it's not an easy path for
It
any
was
child.
it was there was a lot there's a lot going on in this story, and there was a lot to take in. And I started off really not knowing much about the foster care system at all, and it's complicated, but it is what it is at this moment. And I understand DCF is trying to transition into this new model, and there's always going to be some bumps along the road. So
For sure. Okay. I want to move on to our next topic, which is going to be a bill that stops license suspension over unpaid tickets. Brandon covered this one, and I gotta say, there was some back and forth here. This is another contentious. You have kind of carved out this little niche. You keep jumping into these things that there are a lot of different people getting upset about, man. I love it. It's good reporting. But you're throwing yourself right in the middle of this stuff. What happened with this bill?
That's my favorite niche, I think, I feel like when people really start arguing about things, that's when you can get a really good understanding of it. Because, if everyone's just in agreement, it's like, okay, what we get from the bill is what you get in your brain. But once people really start arguing the merits of the bill, then you kind of can see, okay, you can think kind of outside of the bill itself. But so yeah, that is sort of what happened here. Basically, the Judiciary Committee, they voted favorably on this bill. And at first, just off the top of my head, it was an immediate kind of head scratcher to me. It would prevent kind of the suspension of driver's licenses for failure to pay unpaid tickets, so speeding tickets typically, or show up for court appearances for the tickets. It would also require the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles to reinstate the licenses of any drivers whose license were suspended solely because of those reasons. So only because they didn't pay their ticket or they missed court appearances. Obviously, if they were committing other crimes or, they did anything more serious, it doesn't give it doesn't force the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles to reinstate their license. But it was sponsored by Democrats from Hartford, Waterbury, Bridgeport. So big cities. And it seems that really the proponents of the bill kind of argued that there are a lot of people who get tickets and they may not even realize that they've gotten tickets. And it kind of makes sense. Sometimes if you get a ticket out of state, if you get a ticket and it's mailed to you and, you've moved your address, you may not know it. And so their whole argument was preventing people who have gotten tickets, don't even know that they've gotten tickets, or are either incapable of paying them or just have missed court dates because they have busy schedules, yada, yada. Preventing them essentially from getting into more trouble, because what happens if you have, under current law, if you do not pay your ticket or you miss a court appearance, then they can just suspend your license. And if your license is suspended, there's not, it's kind of unclear. I think they said the mechanism currently is they send out written notice. But again, along those same lines, some people don't open their mail, some people move. You may not open the written notice, you may not know your license is suspended. So then if you get pulled over at that point, yeah, then it's more serious, driving with a suspended license. And on the other end of things, we're kind of in a state right now in Connecticut where the fatalities are just really bad. I know that there's been issues with trying to get state troopers. I think there's shortage of staff issues with state troopers, and there's just not a lot of enforcement going on right now on the Thruway. As someone who's relatively new to Connecticut, that was one of the first things I've noticed, is that driving on the Thruway kind of feels like the Wild West sometimes. So let's see, there was one Republican representative who was really, really very opposed to this because of that. Greg Howard from Ledyard. He had noted that, we're kind of on track to surpass 2022's fatality numbers, which were the highest in like 30 or 40 years. We already have 87 fatalities on record this year. So basically there was a lot of people who were against the bill. They kind of agreed with the merit of the bill. At least I know Representative Howard did. He said, I understand you want to protect poor drivers or people who can't afford their tickets. He's like, I'm willing to come to the table and discuss ways that we can help out. I know the Department of Transportation also had submitted written testimony kind of to the same effect, where they were like, look, we're on the front lines here. I think it was over 100 of their vehicles had gotten hit by speeding drivers in, I want to say, 2023. And so they too were very much against this, because they're like, you're putting our people at risk. And they too also sympathized kind of with the notion of, you want to not suspend people's licenses who simply can't afford a ticket, or, can't take off of work to show up to court. But at the same time, you can't basically be more lax on enforcement when, we've already seen what lax enforcement has done over the past couple of years as far as just the safety of the road. So yeah, it was a good back and forth. I'll be interested to see what happens with this one. I checked on the bill today, and it seems right now it's been referred to the Committee on Appropriations, so I'm not sure quite when it's being voted on. I also checked the House calendar, and it's not on there today, so we shall see, but it'll be interesting. I wonder if it'll, if the lively debate will carry over onto the House floor, which honestly I wouldn't be too surprised if it did, just given the nature of this bill. So yeah, it'll be one to watch for
Yeah.
sure.
If that goes to the House floor, that's going to be a long one.
Yeah.
What I do find interesting is that just last year they authorized red light cameras to be placed, because we've had, especially in cities, we've had a lot of pedestrians getting run over. And frankly, I see it all the time. People just running red lights. I've had them go out from behind me to run a red light. I just saw it yesterday. But so they authorized the red light cameras, where the ticket is going to be mailed to you. And then it's, well, if you get the ticket or don't pay it or don't go to court or whatever, don't even worry about it. So it's a kind of interesting follow-up to last year's attempt to crack down on people flying through cities and running over pedestrians.
And that was another one of the biggest counter arguments, was essentially, if you remove our ability to do this, then how are we going to enforce, any sort of traffic infraction, essentially? And Staffstrom, who is, a proponent of the bill, he said, look, basically, if you do get caught, we can still issue a ticket for not appearing to court and mail that over to you. If you go to renew your license, we can just deny that from happening. And he thinks that that's the proper mechanism. And I see where he's coming from, but that seems somewhat of an indirect mechanism, because if you're mailing the appearance ticket, who's to say that they get the appearance ticket or they just ignore the appearance ticket? And then, the only, basically, opponents of the bill had argued that the only thing you could do to clear these cases off the docket, then, if somebody just truly shows that they do not care and they get that, notice to appear ticket, and they say, well, I'm throwing this one out too, would be to rearrest them. And rearresting them would bring about an automatic misdemeanor charge as well, which could kind of be, an over punishment a little bit. So it's a very delicate balance here. I'll be interested to see if they can come to any sort of compromises, or if the bill passes. I don't know. It's one of those sticky situations, I would say. It'll be real interesting to see what happens here.
We'll have to pencil you in for, I don't know, 2-3 years from now to do an accounting of unpaid tickets in the state of Connecticut. See if that goes up or down if this does pass.
Well, if it passes, I'm not paying my Hartford parking tickets anymore.
That's true. We do protect our reporters' addresses, so no one can come to us and help get enforcement on Mark. So don't pay him, Mark. Yeah, licensing is an interesting one generally, right? Driver's licenses, that's an enforcement mechanism that goes through. It has downstream effects clearly in legislation. Driver's licenses are ones that have been around for quite a long time, and I want to talk about licensing with Catherine, because it turns out there are a lot of things in Connecticut that are licensed, but this bill that you wrote about could be a money saver for the people who are doing work, entrepreneurs, different businesses. What's the lowdown here?
Yeah, good news for, Connecticut residents, especially after we all had to pay our income taxes this week. Right, there's a bill that I would imagine is probably going to pass because it had, unanimous support coming out of committee that would cap fees for different type of occupational licenses, renewals, different types of testing, and that sort of stuff at $100 for a lot of occupations that are licensed annually, and then at $200 for occupations that are licensed biannually. And, the good news, the headline here is this is expected to save people who work in industries that are licensed $32 million over the next 2 years. So it would be a revenue loss for the state of about $16 million a year, and that could potentially change over time. According to the Department of Consumer Protection, there's about 60 different types of licenses that are affected, including, CPAs, professional engineers, contractors, a lot of the different types of professions that you think of when you think of occupational licensure. And there are DCP says they receive about 120,000 different applications per year for those professions that are affected. So, that's a significant amount of money. And, some of these fees that are going to be capped at $100 range to over $1,000 a year, which is, a lot, especially if you're a tradesperson or, run a small business that is affected by licensure fees. There was a study that came out, I believe it was last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, from the NE Regulatory Center that said that, Connecticut has the 30th worst occupational licensing regime in the country because of how high our fees are and because of the amount of different types of occupations that require licensure, which is more than in other states. And this is one of the concerns that came up in public testimony on this bill is, New England has kind of a weird situation where we have small states, so it's pretty easy to cross the border and go work in a different state. So this is affecting Connecticut and leading to, shortages in some of these professions that require licensure where the fees are cheaper in other states. Also an interesting bill because, public testimony was unanimously in support of passing this. And you have, like the Connecticut Hospital Association and then, labor organizations that are on the same side saying pass this bill, which, doesn't happen that often. A lot of times those are different sides of the issue.
Yeah, I think, that's an interesting point. But, before everybody gets too happy with that $32 million cost to the state during a budget year when we are right under the spending cap and pretty much anything with a fiscal note, a significant fiscal note they're just saying, no, we can't do it. That's going to be a tough one. Because those fees, as ridiculous as they are, do pay, they bring in obviously millions. So I'd be very interested if they were able to get this across the finish line with that kind of price tag on it.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see, right, of course, because when Governor Lamont issued his budget proposal earlier this year before the session started, it included eliminating licensure fees for, certain types of nurses and home child care providers, again, because of issues with shortages in these kinds of jobs. So seems like, stuff around occupational licensure reform might be a priority of the governor and, could potentially be setting up, if that kind of stuff has been passed, the legislature, could be setting up some of the differences between Lamont and the legislature.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, interesting to see how it impacts the ability to, have needed contractors or needed services too. If we can get more people crossing those borders to provide that, I mean, that could be a quality of life improvement for a lot of folks. Plus a revenue opportunity in other ways, just more business done in the state. So maybe something to overcome that 32 million to Mark's point. I know we're going a few minutes longer than we normally do. I'm ready to wrap up. Anything else, Mark, Catherine, Brandon, that you have before we head into the end here? All right, wonderful. To all of you watching and listening, if you like what we do, please consider becoming a donor. head over to insideinvestigator.org. That donate button is up in the top right-hand corner. We are celebrating our second birthday on Saturday, April 20th. So, you know what? Consider it a birthday gift, please. That would be great. Maybe a $20 a month recurring donation for this next 12 months would be great. Buy Mark some Diet Coke and the rest of us some coffee. That would be wonderful. Seriously, the three of you, thank you for your hard work to produce award-winning journalism and root out corruption in Connecticut. To everyone watching, listening, and tuning in, we will be back in 2 weeks. Until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.